We are slaying monsters.
Don't let the ghosts and the ghouls disturb you, darling.
Happy New Year, everybody. It's a new year, 2025. I hope it's not a shit show.
It's gonna be.
It probably will be. But hey, you know what? We're going to be here. We're going to be having fun throughout and giving you guys some fun stuff to listen to.
Yeah, we are here recording on New Year's Day. It is 11 a.m. on New Year's Day, and we are awake.
We are awake. We made it. We made it through.
It's actually really funny because I don't know. Now, I mean, you know, I do shoots, and a lot of times shoots will like run later at night and stuff like that, depending on when we need to get coverage and what's going on. But in terms of like socially experiencing midnight, I don't think I've done that for probably 5 or 6 years.
Yeah.
The last couple of New Year's, we have just kind of been like up, and then around 10 o'clock, I'm like, okay, it's time to go to bed.
Yeah. Yeah, the New Year's is happening whether I'm awake or not. So,
But
you know.
yeah.
But yeah, this is the first time in a very long time. Why don't you tell our fine listeners what the local tradition is in your area for New Year's?
So I come from a small town in Pennsylvania called Lebanon, and it is the home and the origin of Lebanon bologna. I don't know how many of our listeners are familiar with Lebanon bologna, but it is a relatively well-known meat product in the region. And Lebanon bologna, this tradition started when I was still living there in high school. The town center drops a gigantic hunk of Lebanon bologna. That is what they do. It's a big piece of meat that they drop onto the pavement.
There you go, folks. I mean, it's adorable. What's the one where they turn on the porch light?
That's Blaine.
Oh, okay.
Blaine, Pennsylvania. I don't know if they still do it, but for a while there was a wooden cow that they dropped from somebody's house, and then they turned their porch lights on. But that Blaine is one of those places where this is probably one of 8 houses in the area. You know, it's not a real populated place. We had a cabin up there for a little while.
That's very cute.
I did a lot of fishing there.
And you had an outhouse that looked out onto the road.
Oh, it was
and it
hilarious.
Didn't have a door.
Yeah. It had a door.
Had a door?
It had a door, but the thing is, there was no I guess outhouses, they usually have the little carved moon at the top, so you can get some light in. But this one didn't have that at all. So if you were to not use the outhouse in complete darkness, you had to have the door open. But the outhouse was positioned so it faced the road. And so you would be sitting there and the cars would be going by. And luckily, I mean, it wasn't a real well-traveled road, but the cars would be going by, and were they to look over, they would just see somebody sitting in the outhouse.
This is just great.
I tended not to use the outhouse on our trips. I would just hold it until I got back.
Wow. I understand that completely. So with that, Happy New Year, everybody.
Happy New Year. What a great way to welcome in the new year.
May your outhouse be lit.
Open, yeah. That's the old Irish blessing, isn't it?
It is. I think it's an old Pennsylvania Dutch blessing.
Oh, that's the old Pennsylvania Dutch blessing.
Yeah.
May your outhouse always be lit. May the cars not be plentiful on the road.
All right. Well, we are slaying monsters. We got Maddie J here.
Yo.
And I'm EJ. And Yotzi's actually sitting with us today.
Good boy, Yotzi. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, hopefully he'll be a good boy.
He's drooling all over me right now.
Great. As he does. So yeah, today we were going to talk about, what is it? What's this episode called?
Today we are going to talk about the Beast of Bray Road. Talk about rural America a little bit, Bray Road, Wisconsin. And then in the course of doing this, we are also going to talk about one of the fringe cryptids. We're going to talk about the Dogman. EJ, what do you know about the Dogman?
Nothing.
Okay, well, great. Then we're all going to learn together. So, cryptozoology as a field gets divided in there's little like sects of cryptozoology, right? And one of these sects is the people who are really treating it as like a scientific pursuit. And those are the people that are looking for the most logical, rational creatures that just maybe haven't arrived at the scientific community yet. And a lot of times when you're talking about Bigfoot, you're talking about Sasquatch, you're talking about even the Loch Ness Monster, that will fall into this category because it's like we at least believe that we have evidence of them and they're based on creatures that could theoretically exist. Like Bigfoot is probably the most rational cryptid that we could come up with in terms of like, could this exist? Sure. I mean, it's just a hairy person, right?
Yeah.
More or less. And we're thinking it's probably like a missing link between humans and apes or humans and Neanderthals or something like that. Loch Ness Monster, a lot of people consider it a plesiosaur or some type of giant eel. Both of these things existed at one point, you know, not crazy, maybe even an oarfish, right? Mm-hmm. These are rational cryptids. But then you have these cryptids that are not. And you have these things that are a little bit more fringe. Maybe they're a little bit more supernatural. Not exactly what you would consider realistic. Mm-hmm. Right? And that's where you start to get into the realm of things like the dogman. The dogman is a human-sized creature, shaggy, hairy, with the head of a dog. So canine face, human-ish body, or a big bipedal dog body.
So like a werewolf.
Like a werewolf, exactly. And that's one of the things that people have tried to like now retcon werewolf stories to be like, could this possibly be the rationale behind the dogman? So that is kind of the backdrop of this story. And it's cool because this has created a rift in cryptozoological circles, believe it or not, where there are people who want to just reject all of the research into the dogman because they say, obviously, this doesn't exist. Like, this can't exist, doesn't make any sense. And you're taking time away and good opinions away from people who should be investing them in, say, Sasquatch, which they believe is a realistic cryptid.
Okay. It's an interesting little battle.
Well, yeah, and so it creates this almost little like more paranormal subset of cryptozoology that now believes in this. And this is how you get things like skinwalker belief, which we'll also talk about because the skinwalkers kind of get wrapped up in the dogman mythology as well. And certainly werewolves. And this is where you start to roll in things like dragons and stuff like that, or maybe unicorns, you know, that kind of belief that's like, man, these things don't really exist though, but people talk about them. The Wendigo, right? It's the same type of thing.
Right.
So that's where we are going to find the dogman and the beast of Bray Road. Now, the small town of Elkhorn, Wisconsin holds a wild secret. According to local legend, a werewolf stalks their back roads, terrorizing motorists and feeding on the carcasses of dead animals. This creature, described as a massive bipedal humanoid with a dog's head and a canine face, has been linked to all kinds of weirdness, from satanic cults to religious beliefs to native Sasquatch populations. Spawning an entire subset of research, these dogmen are the disgraced nephew of cryptozoology. A story that just won't die, and one which many think weakens their entire stance on unknown animals.
Why does it weaken the stance?
Because
I feel like it's actually quite believable, to be honest.
But it invalidates cryptozoology. Because the battle that cryptozoology and a lot of these fringe Fortean sciences are always going through is to be taken seriously, right? You have... That's why, like, Avi Loeb is such a big deal. in the
Okay.
alien UFO space
Yeah.
because he's a Harvard professor and people are like, oh, I can take you seriously. Maybe we should put some credence into this UFO alien thing, right? Cryptozoology is always trying to be that. It's trying to be a legitimate science alongside biology. But the more you say, oh, well, let's talk about a Wendigo, the more people are like, come on. I mean, that's obviously just indigenous mythology, right? Maybe? I don't know.
Yeah. It seems like the lizard man is less believable than the dog man. But
So it's funny that you bring up the Lizard Man of Skateboard Swamp, which we did a series on a year or
Maybe?
more ago.
Yeah,
I don't
I don't
remember,
know.
but they're kind of a similar story.
Yeah.
These nighttime roadside, super brief encounters, like just a brush with weirdness.
so do they have, I don't mean to be, I might be jumping ahead, but do they have evidence behind, like the way that they had evidence for the lizard man? Is there evidence for this?
Oh, well-
Footprints?
Well, we have evidence of a dog man. So we have footprints, we have photographs, we even have a very, very famous video called the Gable film, which allegedly has a dogman attack on camera.
Whoa.
And then the police investigation aftermath, including the dismembered victim.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Is it a person that died?
A person.
Oh my God.
Yeah. Yeah.
Are you going to get to this?
Oh, yeah. Oh, well, yeah.
Oh,
I mean,
okay.
you're jumping way
Sorry.
ahead.
I'm
but
just
yes,
like-
no, we're going to talk about it.
Okay, interesting. Continue. I'm
Yeah.
sorry. I just wanted to ask about that because it seems, I don't know, it doesn't seem like the craziest cryptid that could exist. It could be a wild man in the woods that's that just has a lot of hair or something. I don't know.
Just some hairy guy.
Weird dude. But anyway,
What about the canine face?
I don't know. This is a good question.
See, exactly. So that's why the lore, legend, and truth of the Beast of Bray Road and the Michigan Dogman will be the subject of this series. Now, my primary source for this series will be the seminal book on this phenomenon, Linda Godfrey's The Beast of Bray Road, Tailing Wisconsin's Werewolf. Give Linda the pun that she deserves.
Yeah, that's cute. I like that.
I'll also be using Darren Naish's blog article, Werewolves in America, The Tale of the Dogman, on TetZoo, the Tetrapod Zoology blog. And for this episode specifically, I'll be very heavily using Sabine Baring-Gould's The Book of Werewolves. Now, the tale of werewolves or werebeasts is probably as old as human culture itself. Lycanthropy, the ability to shapeshift into an animal, has its origins in ancient Greek legends of people transforming into wolves. In Ovid's Metamorphosis, Lycan, the king of Arcadia, was transformed into a wolf by Zeus. So a god turned him into a wolf. See, King Lycan was trying to trick the god into eating a pile of human flesh. Just kind of, he wanted to see if Zeus was really as omnipotent as he claimed to be. And figured like, well, if I can get you to eat this human flesh, calling it animal flesh, we'll find out. And as with most Greek stories, the moral is when it comes to gods, fuck around and find out. Because Zeus was like, you piece of shit, you're a wolf now.
And that's where we got lycanthropy, huh?
Yes, lycanthropy.
Oh, that's, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now, Norse pagans had the myth of the Igi Einhamir, or those who were, quote, not of one skin. That's what that translates to, not of one skin. The people of this persuasion would cover themselves in the skins or furs of the creatures they wanted to imitate, which granted them the powers of those animals like strength or speed or ferocity. So you kind of think like, want to be a werewolf? Werewolf.
Oh, that's so good. So good. Well, a lot of those ancient cultures, wouldn't they wear animals that they slew, and go to battle?
Oh yeah, we're going to talk about the berserkers
Nice.
shortly.
Okay.
Yep. Now, in one story related by Sabine Baring-Gould in the Book of Werewolves, there were two maidens who wore swan feathers, which allowed them to fly. This is that concept, you wear an animal's skin, you gain their properties. These maidens stopped at the sea to bathe, and they left their swan skins on the shore. And a passerby saw this, stole their swan skins, and trapped the maidens because they couldn't fly away. What does that sound like, EJ?
The Selkie.
Absolutely. Yeah, very, very similar to the Selkie or the Kelpie, where you steal the seal's skin and you keep the creature trapped in its human form.
That's oddly very similar.
Isn't it interesting how there are just certain myths that cross cultures like that?
And what culture was the swan from again? Was that Norse?
Yeah, that was Norse.
I mean, they sure liked getting in their boats and traveling. It's possible that the Irish picked it up from them. And I don't know.
Yeah, it's possible.
Yeah.
Now, the Vikings themselves, we were just mentioning, had their own legendary skin wearers, the berserkers, right? These warriors would kill and skin bears or wolves and wear those skins into battle. They, or more accurately their enemies, claimed that the pelts would give them supernatural ferocity, speed, strength, and even drive them into a blood rage, which is where we get the term berserk from. The Old Norse word for going berserk is hamask, which literally means change form.
Oh, wow.
And allegedly, they were really terrifying, too. The stories, they say they were immune to fire and iron. They would howl like wolves in battle, and that they would chew on their shields. That was one of the things that kept popping up in all of my research. They would be so ferocious and frothing at the mouth that they would actually bite into their shields as a way of like letting that ferocity out.
Wow. I wonder too if they were in trances before they would go into battle. Like a lot of cultures would like rev up their warriors and stuff. And I wonder if those guys were under some kind of influence, and that's why they were so nuts. There's
been a lot of research into what the berserkers were and how they arrived at that state, because they were nuts in some way, in some fashion. So modern researchers, some people say that they maybe use drugs like mushrooms to induce this kind of psychedelic rage. Others contend that they simply drank themselves into a raging stupor, which is very in line with the Vikings at that time. And some even believe that it was a self-induced psychosis, like almost a mass hysteria, similar to violence or like mob mentality that you were talking about. They would psych themselves up to the point of this frothing, bloodthirsty rage. There was one warrior in particular whose name was Keveldulf, and that translates to night wolf, Keveldulf.
Ooh.
And he claimed to transform into a bloodthirsty beast at night. And he was so strong in his frenzied form that allegedly during a raid on a ship, he swung his axe, shattered an opponent's helmet, buried the blade all the way into the man's head, and then with the axe head still embedded in the skull of his victim, he hurled the body into the air and overboard.
Wow. Those are the kinds of stories you want to get out to your enemies.
Well, and that's the thing, right? So I have this theory when it comes to the berserkers that a decent amount of this is fabrication created by later writers to paint the Norse warriors in like a barbaric or feral light, which I'm sure to a certain extent it was useful for them too. But Baring Gold notes in his book, according to unanimous testimony of the Old Norse historians, the berserker rage was extinguished by baptism, and as Christianity advanced, the number of these berserkers decreased. So you could get them to calm down and break them out of their ferocity through baptism, through prayer.
I'm sure they were a lot easier to conquer that way.
Or to put it another way, Christianity soothed the savage beast.
Ooh. Yes, it did.
But the thing is, like, and also I can only, I have to say, I can only imagine. You remember in the second Avengers where Black Widow calms Hulk down by going, the sun's getting real low, big guy, sun's getting real low. Mm-hmm. Like that kind of thing, except with, crosses.
Yes.
But that whole idea to me of these people afterwards saying, oh, the berserkers were crazy in battle, but Christianity was able to stop them, just drips with post hoc rhetoric. And this narrative, we see it all the time, of civility overcoming savage natives. That's such a common story in the advancing world.
Yeah, it really is. They want to wear their little bear shirts and go crazy. Let them do their thing. I mean,
support their right to bear arms.
Yes, exactly.
Oh man,
you're killing it.
We're coming into 2025 hot on puns.
Yeah, exactly. Oh man, I imagine though that it was a very useful thing to strike fear into the hearts of all the like other islands that they conquered. Like, if I was an English person and I saw them coming in with their fleet and with their furs, I would just be like, here you go. You can take the town.
Well, I mean, absolutely. You see these warriors, they're coming in, they look crazy. Mm-hmm. They look like charging bears or charging wolves at you. That's scary, man. And like they said, and Baron Gold said, they were howling. They were chewing on their own armor. That's scary.
And if you can't conquer them by force, then you conquer them through changing their minds.
Absolutely.
With religion.
Yeah. It becomes a psychological warfare instead.
Yes.
Right. Now, regardless, this transformation from mild-mannered human to wild animal forms the foundation of werewolf mythology to come. Stories of people shifting into animals and giving into their baser instincts are used from time to time to justify brutal attacks like murder and explain madness. So we're talking about, 1400s, maybe the 1500s. Mm-hmm. We're trying to understand why things happen, why humans behave the way that they do. And this was a logical way to explain that. You're like, oh man, this person had a brutal murder that they enacted on another person or several people. Early serial killers, even. Mm-hmm. Why would they do this? You can't comprehend this, and so you say they must have been overtaken by the spirit of an animal.
And we still do this today. We still explain away things through demons, or even on ghost hunting shows. You come in and it's like, oh, the father, he acts so differently in this house when he comes to this house. He's just a different person, and everybody's like, oh, it's a demon. And it's like immediately, like we never want to look in. We don't never want to, but a lot of the people that are prone to this sort of thinking, even today, will not look into the real causes of it. Instead, they'll go into something fantastical. And
we will see time and time again as we unfold this story, how werewolves, how this dogman notion, especially a physical shift notion, like a lycanthropy, is very closely tied to Satanism, or at least some kind of demonology.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
So for an example of using this to justify behavior that we couldn't quite understand, in 1521, a shepherd named Pierre Bouget was tried for witchcraft and cannibalism. Under oath, he testified that he'd made a pact with the devil who promised to protect his sheep. He said, I renounced Christianity, kissed his left hand, that's the devil's left hand, which was black and ice cold as that of a corpse. Then I fell on my knees and gave my allegiance to Satan. I remained in the service of the devil for 2 years and never entered a church before the end of Mass, or at all events till the holy water had been sprinkled according to the desire of my master.
It's interesting why people make these kinds of claims against their own interests. Why do you think he did something like that?
I think he was probably inclined to by the people who were putting him on trial. And we'll talk a little bit about that as we continue here. But there were, you have a rising religion and you have a church that has a very vested interest in creating a separation between God and Satan, and creating the best way to encourage a religion to foster is not by saying, oh, God's going to give you all of these things. We think it is, but it's not. The best way is to say, look at the terrible things that could happen. Mm-hmm. You don't want these to happen. I have a solution.
Yeah.
So much religion, and we are going to get really heavy into religion in this, and like the philosophical direction of religion, right? But so much of the philosophical direction of religion, it comes from the stick, not the carrot.
Yeah. Finding the pain point and it's salesmanship, really.
No, I mean you're right to put it in modern day LinkedIn language. Yeah. Find the pain point, address the pain point, and say, I have the solution for that. Come pay me for my TED Talk.
Yeah, exactly.
Nothing has changed.
No, it hasn't changed. Yeah.
Now, Bouget continued that he was led into the woods where another of the devil's servants told him to strip naked and cover his body with a salve. And although it sounds like this is about to head into some Pornhub territory, Bouget swore that this ritual transformed him into a wolf.
Ooh.
He said, I was at first somewhat horrified at my 4 wolves' feet and the fur with which I was covered all at once. But I found that I could now travel at the speed of the wind. That transformation lasted until the salve was removed from Bouget's body, which restored him to his human form. And during these wolf runs, he claimed to have killed and eaten a woman and a young girl, along with several other satanic werewolves in his pack. He was one of a member of a bunch of these wolves doing this run.
And we even have this today, people claiming outlandish things that they did not do,
right?
Because they have been pushed by police to say it, or just otherwise coerced. Right. And it's interesting that it happened back then. It happens today. It's never ending. This is the way that it is.
Right.
I wonder if he. But on another note, I wonder if he was taking hallucinogens or something, because it sounds like, or he could have been lying. Like none of this could be true. But he also could be like, he could have been on something while he ran around and did stuff.
Entirely possible. Yeah, entirely. I mean, he also might have just been super drunk, Who knows?
Or
right?
None of it happened at all.
There is speculation that whatever he was putting on his skin did have some type of hallucinogenic property. Thinking possibly wormwood or something like that.
Oh, yeah. Uh-huh.
Because that's a known kind of poison toxin that might have altered his state of consciousness. Mm. Absinthe, of course, comes from that, right?
Yeah, right. Okay.
And ultimately, he was burned at the stake. Now, that was just one of 600 cases of witchcraft heard by French judge Henri Bouquet. I guess that's
Henri Bouquet.
Henri Bouquet, right? Henri Bouquet. Much like the witch trials that were happening in Europe and the Americas in the 15th and 16th century, France had their own satanic inquisition at the time. But their target wasn't witches, it was werewolves, and those suspected of becoming werewolves and lycanthropes. By the end of the century, France had locked itself into a werewolf panic, with the church calling it an epidemic. Rumors say as many as 30,000 people were accused of being werewolves, although that's a very debated number.
That's like everybody.
Yeah.
There weren't a lot of people there back then.
Yeah, it's most likely that was blown out of proportion at some point during later reporting. It's probably about a tenth of that. It's probably like 3,000 people, something like that. But still, a lot of people. There were enough people that the church declared it an epidemic. There were so many alleged werewolves out there. Much of this follows this familiar path of the witch trials. Livestock death was a huge trigger, and that would get blamed on wolves. But you could also blame it on your rivals. If they had something that you wanted, or if they were aggressive or spiteful, if you didn't like them, you could say, oh, I think my neighbor, Jean-Luc, is a werewolf and has been attacking my livestock. Put him on trial.
That is exactly what happened in America, except for witches. They would
For
blame
sure.
people for their cows dying.
Yep. And I mean, this was it was a big problem. And I don't remember in America, why did the cows die? Were they attacked?
Oh, you mean really or not really? Like
Really?
really?
Yeah.
I don't. I think every situation is unique. I don't know.
Okay.
Like it could have been.
Because in France, there were wolves killing cows.
Yeah.
And so it's almost more logical in France because you see a wolf kill a cow and then you see the wolf run off and you say, oh my God, that wolf looked like Jean-Luc or whatever.
He was wearing Jean-Luc's little hat. I don't know how the cows were dying in the Americas, but I think there probably were wolves there at that time.
I mean, it would make sense, yeah.
Not that I don't know for sure, but yeah.
Yeah, I don't remember offhand if it was a particular pandemic for the cows, like if there was some type of hoof and mouth disease or something like that, or if it was just regular animal attacks or whatever. Yeah, the thing about the French werewolf panic is that wolves were killing animals. We know that for a fact. You combine this, this sort of distrust or at least coveting of your neighbor with an almost universal fear of the specter of the devil, and you have a very fertile ground for these rumors to spread. Because then, I say, oh, Jean-Luc killed my cows. My neighbor on the other side says, did you hear Jean-Luc killed the cows? He's a werewolf. And then that gets passed around the entire town, and now everybody knows that Jean-Luc is a werewolf.
Yeah, and people also learn a really useful tool to get rid of people that they don't like.
Absolutely. And then the other people in town start saying, I wonder if my neighbor could be dealt with in the same fashion. Remember, too, this was the time of the Inquisition. We're already hunting people down. The church is already suspicious. It's just such a fertile time for these rumors to spread. And this all set the stage for what is probably the most famous werewolf panic in history. In 1764, a series of attacks terrorized the French province of Gévaudan. For 4 years, residents reported sighting a monster killing their livestock. The attacks quickly escalated until the beast was preying on lone humans as well. Descriptions of the creature varied greatly. Sometimes it was likened to a hyena, sometimes a lion. Some people said it walked on 2 legs like a person and performed great feats of athleticism, or maybe possessed supernatural cunning.
Did it do like a high rope walk or a type or
It did.
a trapeze?
Yeah. It did a little bit of bar and then
Nice.
Cartwheels and a round off.
Could it use the horse well? Was it on a horse, with the
No, the parallel bars,
the
right?
parallel bars? Okay, that's impressive. I'm impressed by this wolf.
Other people said it was invulnerable, or that it behaved too much like a human to be a regular wolf or coyote. The attacks were very aggressive, rather than motivated by like a simple desire to feed. Whatever it was, this creature was fearless in the face of humans and hunting dogs.
Sounds like rabies.
It does sound like rabies, but this was pointed out by Brian Dunning of Skeptoid. There were victims, like livestock victims of the attacks that didn't die, but then didn't die from rabies either. Where you would think that if they got bit and were bit by a rabid animal, they would contract rabies themselves.
Definitely.
So maybe, but probably not rabies.
Okay.
2 years into the flap, 1765, the government appointed dragoons in the Gévaudan countryside to guard against the beast. So it's clear that these attacks sowed terror in the locals and distrust in the competency of the military, because you were appointing dragoons and the dragoons weren't killing it. Now, in 1767, 3 years after the attacks began, a hunter named Jean Chastel shot a large wolf on just a hunting trip, regular old hunting trip. This was brought back to Charroux, where it was autopsied and exhibited as the, quote, beast of the Gévaudan. Rumors spread that Chastel had only brought the monster down because he had said prayers before shooting it, and because he'd used bullets that were made of melted down metals of the Virgin Mary.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that was the only way he was able to kill it. Because remember, it was supposedly invulnerable. Neither of these statements were true, but they did further the narrative that the beast was some type of supernatural creature.
Wow, he's starting the lore.
Yeah, and that melted down now it wasn't silver, it was melted down Virgin Mary metals.
Okay.
But that's still this concept of like, oh, a silver bullet, right? Like you need a special bullet to kill a werewolf.
It was a very clear, this is a fight between good and evil.
Absolutely, right? Think back again to the Viking berserkers, where the only way that we could possibly get them to calm down from their rage was through Christian baptism. The exact same thing here. The only way you could possibly kill this beast is with the power of the Virgin Mary.
She's pretty badass in battle. There is that whole book in the Bible about her time at war.
The Book of Battle Maiden.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, before she was the mother of Jesus, she was the mother of...
She was the mother of kicking ass.
Yeah. Yeah.
Still, to this day, we don't know if Chastel's animal was actually responsible for the attacks of the previous years, or what the beast of the Gévaudan actually was. It's speculated that the beast of the Gévaudan was pinned on Chastel's creature as kind of a way of publicly putting an end to this reign of terror. A scapegoat in wolf's clothing, if you will.
Yeah, even if it wasn't the beast, at least it could calm people down enough to get over this
Hysteria.
hysteria.
Exactly, because as soon as a couple of these reports start, of course, every wolf that you see could be the beast. And then everybody's terrified. Any dead livestock is the responsibility of the beast of the Gévaudan. Right? Some rumors speculate that the actual beast, the one that he shot, was a lion or a hyena, which had escaped from a private collector. And these are based on depictions, which sometimes give the beast stripes. And this kind of, it looks leaner. It looks like more feline as opposed to canine.
I guess that could have been. There could have been an exotic animal that kind of got loose.
It's possible. Other theories point to an Italian wolf, which have leaner bodies and sharper features and might not have been known to local residents if there was a population that had migrated a little farther. Still, other people propose mange, a condition that can greatly affect the coat and the appearance of the animal. Rabies was considered, but as we said, it's pretty much been ruled out because it wasn't passed to any of the livestock that survived. And the crazy thing is, Chastel's wolf disappeared during the intervening years, which complicated things even more.
Like the body disappeared?
Yeah, it's gone.
Oh.
We don't know what happened to it. We don't have any reporting surrounding it. We don't have any documentation of it other than the fact that it was sent and displayed in Charroux.
Okay.
It's likely that the beast of the Gévaudan will remain a mystery, albeit one with some reasonable and some outlandish explanations. My personal guess is that there were probably several wolves responsible, and a pack had kind of become desensitized to humans. You see that sometimes with these wolves, even dogs, it was like a soft domestication almost, where they became used to humans as humans were taking over more of their territory. And maybe that even got passed down from wolf to wolf. As new puppies were born, they learned to be desensitized to humans. Then hysteria follows, right? Because you have wolves that are way closer than they should be. You have regular wolf sightings, attacks, which were common at the time anyway, but they became sightings of the beast instead. When Chastil took an appropriate specimen, the government seized on a very easy solution, and a solution that allowed Christianity to reign, and the attacks died down simply because public opinion turned. Due to its claimed intelligence, its athleticism, rumors linked the beast of the Gévaudan to a werewolf, of course.
Yeah.
Over the next 200 years, occasional reports pop up, slowly diminishing as we gained a greater understanding of science and anatomy. The werewolf remained relegated to demonology, a kind of creature that could only exist with the help of the devil. Because what's happening, and we'll continue to talk about this throughout the entire series that we're doing here, but biology starts to develop. Like, we start to understand biology. And the more you understand, the more you're like, this isn't possible, right? And so what is the solution to, I saw a werewolf, werewolves aren't possible, must be some type of demonic interference.
Yeah.
That makes it possible now.
Definitely. Also, like, the devil can turn people into animals.
That's what they say.
And God isn't doing that? I don't think.
No, he's also not turning them back, which is interesting.
I think the devil's way cooler in this scenario.
I mean, I think it's kind of awesome. The devil's like, hey, you want to become a wolf? He was like, sure,
All
cool.
right.
All right.
And I'll turn you back when you want to be turned back? Okay.
Yeah, go get naked in the woods with a bunch of these guys.
Sounds like a great idea.
So werewolves, they kind of, as we learn more and more about biology, more and more about science, they fall into this realm of supernatural creatures that we're like, they probably don't exist, right? Doubtful. Until Montague Summers appeared on the scene. Now, Summers is one of the most fascinating people in 20th century occult and supernatural research, if you can call it that. He was born to a wealthy family in Bristol, England, and educated at Trinity College. And he was something of a cross between pre-goth and pilgrim. He preferred to wear black robes and the shoes with the buckles, like the pilgrim shoes with the buckles, and wide-brimmed hats. And he gave off this air of being born like 2 centuries too late.
Aw.
Although he was never officially ordained, Summers called himself a reverend. He may have been unofficially ordained as a wandering bishop. You ever heard the term wandering bishop?
Is that when you just get lost in the grocery store? Like a bishop goes into the grocery store and he's like, oh, where's my mommy? I'm lost.
No, that is someone who's been excommunicated from the church at some point. Yeah.
No way.
Mm-hmm. So either way, whether he was ordained and excommunicated or not, he took on the mantle, cloak, all of it, and dove into his true love, historical texts. He was obsessed with Gothic fiction, and he started devouring ghost stories. He became obsessed with the occult and the supernatural, and in 1926 published an extensive chapter in the series The History of Civilization by editor C.K. Ogden. Summers' section was titled History of Witchcraft and Demonology, and was written in his signature style, which is like a mix between, I'd say, religious teachings and his love for Gothic horror. He said, "The witch was an evil liver, a social pest and parasite, the devotee of a loathy and obscene creed. an adept at poisoning, blackmail, and other creeping crimes, a member of a secret organization inimical to the church and state, a blamer in word and deed, swaying the villagers by terror and superstition, a charlatan and a quack sometimes, a bawd, an abortionist, the dark counselor of lewd court ladies and adulterous gallants, a minister to vice and inconceivable corruption, battening up the filth and foulest passions of age.
Wow, that was very descriptive.
Yeah. And it makes witches sound pretty fucking awesome, actually.
It really does. I mean, but this was the 1920s, right?
Yes.
So as a man of history, he should have really known better that the witches, the quote witches, were the victims.
It's so weird. He found these archaic texts and texts that the church really didn't like to talk about because they were like, we made some mistakes back then, you know, like we killed a lot of people in the name of something that was probably wrong. But he took them at face value and he ignored all of the backtracking, all of the walking back that happened in the intervening 2 centuries and was like, no, these are absolutely fundamentally true.
He would have been very dangerous back then. If he was born back then, he would have been like like a Cotton Mather or whatever?
Cotton Mather, yeah. Yeah, I hate to say it, but he would be very dangerous now.
Yes. That's really a scary statement and a very true statement.
Yeah. Because the thing is, even at this time, the witch trials, the werewolf panic, they were these black spots on the church's record. You know, there was a bunch of deception, a bunch of killing of innocent people just because somebody accused them of something. But that didn't stop him from just charging forward with these things. In 1928, he published the first full English translation of the Malleus Maleficarum, or the Hammer of Witches. Now, that was essentially a guide for demon hunters written in the 1500s, and was, of course, one of the books that drove the witch trials and the Satanic panic of the 17th and 18th centuries. But despite the church's refutations of the Malleus and its contents, Summers declared that it was all completely true. Catholic historian Geoffrey Burton Russell, in his later Witchcraft of the Middle Ages, called Summers' work erratic and unreliable, and wrote that it was marred by frequent liberties in translation, inaccurate references, and wild surmises. They are almost totally lacking in historical sense. Summers saw witchcraft as a manifestation of the eternal and unchanging warfare between God and Satan.
Wow, he really cherry-picked data. Like,
He absolutely did.
Just whatever he wanted.
And sometimes he would just make stuff up as he was translating. Like, who was going to stop him, right? Yeah. And certainly, the more Summers looked, the more he saw. Diving deep into the history of horror, he moved to ancient vampire legends and published 2 books on vampires. Taking the same stance, Summers was convinced that vampires were a real threat and needed to be dealt with.
Quick question.
Yeah.
Is that why it's Buffy Summers?
I never made that connection until you said it right now. Maybe. I don't know where Summers came from, but possibly, yeah. Yeah, I always believed that Rupert Giles came from Giles Corey and the witch trials.
Wow.
So, I mean, it's entirely possible that, yeah, Buffy Summers came from Montague Summers. I never thought about it, but yeah, maybe.
Wow, there's my hot theory of the day.
I love it. Do you know Buffy is a shortened form of Elizabeth?
No.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's like an archaic nickname for Elizabeth.
Is it really?
Yes.
I will now make people call me Buffy.
There you go.
Although I never really liked that name Buffy. I always thought it was a silly name.
Well, and it's supposed to be, right? Like in the show, he picked it because it was so like Valley Girl-ish. It was such a ditzy kind of name for this really badass girl. Anyway.
Well, yeah, I wonder if it's like it was Bethy, and then because of the accent, how TH can sometimes be an F in certain dialects, it becomes Beffy.
Yeah, I think that was it. Yeah.
That's my theory. Okay. Oh, how fun. Okay, continue. Sorry.
It's crazy to say, but Summers was kind of an early version of a conspiracy theorist, albeit a religious one. The more time he spent researching, the more he found books and writings that supported his theories about the world, that there were dark powers lurking in the shadows, the monsters under his bed were real. And the more he wrote, the more he unintentionally created his own connections and setups. So if you think about it, he was building a universe of horror without realizing it. He was creating his own universe.
He sounds like the subjects of our last series.
Very much so. Yeah. Yeah, he falls right in line with your David Farrant or Sean Manchester. Bishop Sean Manchester is very much a similar character.
He created a lore, for sure. Sean Manchester did,
yes. So to Summers, reading the Malleus Maleficarum, this was a totally legitimate piece of Catholic doctrine, as essential as the Bible. And the deeper he dove into this occult rabbit hole that he was creating, the more he became convinced that the old world Catholics were right and evil forces were threatening the piety of everyday people. And it didn't hurt that he had become contemporaries with one Aleister Crowley, founder of Thelema.
I can't imagine that they would ever get along, those two.
It was more that Crowley and Summers were both kind of in the same social strata. And so they ended up at the same gatherings, functions, and parties, even though I don't know that they had a lot to talk about. Although, knowing Crowley, he probably did.
He probably talked to him. He would talk to him, but I don't know about the other guy.
Yeah.
I don't know about Summers.
Yeah. I mean, Crowley, for those who aren't familiar, he created this pseudo-religion called Thelema in association with Madame Blavatsky, but he viewed the whole thing as kind of a gag, a way of poking fun at people who took him too seriously. And unfortunately, one of those people was Montague Summers. Thanks to his, Summers' self-built universe of witches and Satanists and vampires and all of this stuff, he became convinced that Crowley believed every word he was saying. And Crowley was exactly the kind of person that Summers was afraid of. And so Summers closed the 1920s by publishing his 2 books on vampires. The Vampire, His Kith and Kin, and The Vampire in Europe. And these couldn't have come at a more significant time, because they were coming on the heels of Bram Stoker's Dracula, and right before Universal Studios' adaptation. And so they formed an even deeper, even more elaborate tapestry of folklore for vampires. Now, spurred by his flawed research methods, Summers turned his attention to the vampire's fluffier companion. In 1933, he published The Werewolf in Lore and Legend, an outrageously inaccurate collection of werewolf mythology, with some of his own nonsense conclusions sprinkled in. Trying to strike what he would have considered a skeptical balance, Summers proposed the theory that a person isn't actually transforming into a wolf, but merely being made to appear as a wolf through an illusionary process.
I would say that's probably more likely than turning into a wolf.
Well,
so,
right.
Good for him.
And this is the thing. We're talking 1933. We understand that lycanthropy isn't real. Well, lycanthropy is kind of real because it's a mental disorder, but that's the idea of lycanthropy transforming into a wolf. Not real, not possible. But Summers believes that werewolves were real, and so he had to come up with some concept to make them real, to validate his theory. He said, maybe the person just appears to shift into a wolf, but they don't actually do it. Now you have to justify how did that happen? And so Summers concluded that Satan changes the appearance of the person to present as more wolf-like, which is where the idea of werewolves came from, according to him. So it's the devil that's actually manipulating reality and making everyone think they see a wolf, and making the person transforming think that they are a wolf.
I wonder if he got this idea after he went to an illusion illusion show, like a magic show, which were happening. I mean, that was
he
a thing.
Very much may have. Parlor magic was a huge scene. Well, we call it parlor magic, but like stage magic was a huge scene at that time.
Mm-hmm.
So absolutely, maybe this could have been. I think Thurston was around at that point. So yeah, sure. Anyway, that would be some like next level reality manipulation. But it's easier for Summers to come up with that than try to twist science into some making werewolves happen, which isn't possible.
Yeah.
And to me, this is all a very fascinating insight into how this conspiratorial thinking happens. Burgeoning science doesn't support werewolves, right? So we need fantastical reasons for them. Satan, his dark arts swoop in. Now that's a get out of jail free card. One which you can invoke anytime you want to say something crazy.
Yeah.
Like, oh, well, that's just witchcraft. That's why it doesn't jive with modern biology. I don't know that Montague Summers' Werewolf was popular necessarily, but it did provide a more modern interpretation of the mythology first laid out by Sabine Baring Gould in the 1860s. And it at least helped to contribute to the growing occult obsession in popular culture at the time. Remember, this is all the time of Crowley, of Universal Studios monster movies, all in the shadow of Helena Blavatsky and the Theosophists. So we have entire generations who had grown up reading Victorian Gothic horror and are now stepping into the shoes of the creators and expanding the mythology themselves. The directors of these Universal Studios monster movies grew up reading Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, right? So it should come as no surprise that in 1935, Universal Pictures capitalized on the growing werewolf craze and released Werewolf of London, its sixth entry into its monster horror franchise, depending on whether you count 1925's Phantom of the Opera and the films that came before it or not. I don't, in much the same way that I don't actually consider Blade the first Marvel movie, even though it technically was. But Phantom was retconned in 1945, so if anything, that Phantom exists in the Universal Monster canon in much the same way that Ang Lee's Hulk isn't really part of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Anyway.
Nerd alert.
But no, it's true. So there was the original Lon Chaney Phantom of the Opera, but that kind of fell by the wayside and then was replaced by a later Phantom of the Opera. Anyway. So
I'll take your word for it.
Now, Werewolf of London took an even more scientific approach to the monster, where a botanist had been bitten by a werewolf while studying a fictional plant that blooms under the full moon. That bite passed a disease of werewolfism, or what they called lycanthrophobia, to him, and caused a transformation that could only be stopped by the moon plant that he was studying. This was the first time that lycanthropy is linked to a transmittable disease like rabies, rather than a pact with the devil. Up until this point, it's always been devil doing it. Star and Wolfman Henry Hull's makeup, although extensive, was designed to keep the actor's face visible. That was done for two reasons. One, obviously, to allow the actor to emote and speak. But also, the script necessitated that the Wolfman was recognized by people who saw him. The resulting werewolf appears more as a dog-faced man covered in hair than an actual animal, a trend which continues to this day.
So that's the first time we saw that.
Yes, a
change.
quote-unquote dog man, as opposed to... Because really, all the stories of werewolves up until this point, lycanthropes up until this point, are always, I'm a human person, I'm about to shift into a wolf. But not this, like, mutant between species thing.
I never knew that.
Yeah. Yeah,
That's
the original origins, assuming you discount the berserkers, right? The original origins are just a person who becomes an animal, more like Sam from True Blood.
Right.
Or the werewolves in True Blood, too. You know, it's just
yeah.
Alcide's now a wolf.
Right.
The makeup was designed by Jack Pierce, who also designed the makeup for Boris Karloff in 1931's Frankenstein. But in a cruel twist of fate, Werewolf of London was released just after Frederick Marsh's Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, which many moviegoers considered the superior story of a man struggling with his good and evil sides. The science gone awry, and even the makeup echoed Marsh's ugly, kind of brutish appearance, and the audiences largely dismissed Werewolf of London.
Aw.
Well, it's okay.
Oh.
Because 6 years later, makeup artist Jack Pierce was hired for another werewolf movie, Lon Chaney Jr.'s The Wolf Man. This movie, released in 1941, continued the idea of transmissible lycanthropy, with the protagonist again attacked by a werewolf. The movie brought a new section of the myth into the fold, that silver was the only thing that can harm a werewolf. In fact, Lon Chaney's beast is finally brought down by beating it with a silver-headed cane.
That is such an old-fashioned thing. Like,
I know, right?
Is this the movie where you see his face shift, get
Yes.
hairier and hairier?
Yeah. Mhm.
Cool. Okay.
Yep, he had to sit in a makeup chair for hours, apparently, and they, like, slowly applied it, and then took a little video, and then slowly applied it. Took a little bit more film. Yeah.
And he couldn't move because it was all...
Yeah, because they were crossfading between. Yeah, it was a very advanced camera technique at the time. It was really cool.
It's still cool to this day. Like, I think it's a really awesome transformation.
Yeah, and some of it's really well done too. The 1941 one isn't as good as the later Frankenstein meets Wolfman, but the transformation in Frankenstein meets Wolfman is like seamless. It's really good. Also worth pointing out that Frankenstein meets Wolfman, the second movie to feature the Wolfman, was actually the first crossover movie in a cinematic universe.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. These films also built lore with an iconic poem spoken by a Welsh Romani woman named Maleva. Even a man who is pure at heart and says his prayers at night may become a wolf when the wolf's bane blooms and the autumn moon is bright.
Beautiful.
In later installments, that final line was changed to, and the moon is full and bright, further cementing the association of werewolves and the full moon. Mm-hmm. Now, that said, the idea of a lunar-influenced lycanthropy is present in French werewolf myths, too. Montague Summers said, in the south of France, it is still believed that fate has destined certain men to be lycanthropes that are transformed into wolves at full moon.
Did he just make that up, though?
Most likely, yeah.
Okay. I don't know.
Yeah. Everything he writes, you have to take with a grain of salt. Mm-hmm. He was very creative.
Yeah, and it's easy, I think, to put lore onto something that's so old.
Oh, for sure.
When you're writing it and you're like, oh, that's a really cool idea that Hollywood came up with. I'm going to legitimize it and say, yes, well, did you know in the south of France in the 1300s? How do you disprove that, I guess? Because everything was very, I don't know, like it's just a thought I had. It could be true, but it's just, to me, he doesn't seem very believable.
No, not at all.
So
I would not trust him.
I'm a little skeptical of where he comes from.
Being skeptical of Montague Summers is a very, very intelligent place to be.
Thank you.
It's also worth pointing out that later on in his life, he became pretty anti-Semitic as well.
Did he really?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
He believed that European Jews kidnapped and sacrificed Christian children.
Ugh.
So anyway, thanks to its cinematic popularity, werewolves continued to be recurring creatures in horror for decades. From I Was a Teenage Werewolf to The Howling, An American Werewolf in London, Teen Wolf, lycanthropy became a popular hook to hang coming-of-age plots and stories of man versus nature. Which is why it was so incredible that in December of 1991, an animal control officer in Elkhorn, Wisconsin, started getting calls about a werewolf. Now, the first and most well-known report came from Lori Andrezzi, a 26-year-old restaurant manager. While driving home one night in the fall of 1989, she was startled by something on Bray Road. A huge animal crouched over a roadkill carcass with shaggy fur and pointed ears. She described it to Linda Godfrey in The Beast of Bray Road. It was kneeling. Its elbows were up and its claws were facing out, so I knew it had claws. I remember it had long claws. The headlights of her car didn't frighten the creature away, and it continued to eat while watching her drive by. She later estimated that it was 6 or 7 feet tall and about 150 pounds. She described the sighting to reporters and kept comparing it to a person, saying it was, quote, ordinary human-sized. Not a dog or a coyote, always like a human.
And she said it was kind of on its knees, right?
Yeah, it was crouched.
Yeah.
Yeah, like on its haunches.
Oh, on its haunches. Like,
does that make sense? Yeah,
yes.
like crouched on its haunches, eating this thing with its hands, holding something up with its hands and eating it.
Wow.
What's crazy is that Andrezzi probably would have forgotten about the incident if it wasn't for a second report 2 years later. On Halloween night, 1991, a teenager named Doris Gibson also had a roadside run-in with the beast. Gibson was driving down Bray Road that night when she hit something unseen on the road. Whatever it was, it lifted her front tire off the ground, meaning that it was likely lying on the road or at least crouched there. Startled, she continued for what she estimated to be about 50 or 60 feet before coming to a stop and getting out of her car. She approached the spot of the accident, but no animal was lying on the road. Whatever it was she had hit, she'd run it over, and it simply walked away. Reassured now that she hadn't critically injured anything, she started back toward her car when something exploded out of the darkness and charged at her. She described it. Here comes this thing, and it's just running up at me. It was no dog. It was bigger than me. This did not look like a German Shepherd, I'll swear to that.
Wow. Does she say that it was hairy or that it looked like a...
Yes, it was hairy. Yes.
Okay.
Yes, it was like a big dog.
Wow.
She dashed for her car. She leapt in. She floored it. But even as she drove off, she could see the creature's hairy chest in her rearview mirror. So think about what that height must be, right? That's like human size to see the chest of this animal in her mirror.
Right.
She swore that the only way she'd be able to see the beast's torso was if it was running on 2 legs. She was able to get away unscathed, or so she thought. Later that night, while picking up a friend at a party, the two of them saw the beast again. Both people saw a hairy creature on the side of the road. Terrified, Gibson sped away, happy to not see this thing again, put some miles between her and it. But the next day, she found scratch marks on the trunk of her Plymouth Sundance. To her, they looked like claw marks, indicating just how close she had been to becoming werewolf food.
Wow. So this was... When was this again?
1991.
1991.
And then Lori Andrezzi's site was 1989, her sighting.
When was the Lizard Man? When were those roadside incidents?
Lizard Man of Skateboard Swamp sighting was 1988. That was a year before Lori Andrezzi's sighting.
Okay.
Yeah.
It just sounds very similar, like with the scratch marks on the
It's so
car.
similar, right? It's exactly the same thing. In the Lizard Man, the exact same, he thought he hit something. He got out. He was looking. Or no, he had a flat tire.
Oh, he did, yes.
He had a flat tire, but he got out of his car. He was fixing the flat tire. Something rushed at him. He jumped in. It was pursuing him. It scratched. I think for him, it was the hood of his car. It scratched the hood of his car. The exact same kind of sighting.
They sound very similar.
Yes, very, very similar. The difference is the Lizard Man had red eyes, whereas Doris Gibson is describing this hairy creature.
Yeah, very different animal.
Right.
Yeah.
These stories would likely have remained just that. Stories, urban legends. But they ended up on the desk of a local reporter who was very eager to make a name for herself. And it's with her investigation and the sudden flap of werewolf sightings that we will pick up next time.
Cool. Wow, this is actually quite appropriate because we are experiencing a drone flap.
Yes, we are.
So-
Well, this is also appropriate, and I wanted to do this because right now, well, by the time we finish this series, the new Wolfman movie will have come out.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought it would be cool, since we were able to line up our vampire series with the release of Nosferatu in theaters, I thought it'd be cool to try to line up a werewolf series in time for the release of the Wolfman. Also, maybe Night Bitch. I haven't seen Night Bitch, but that just released. And
Oh, right.
And that is the woman transforming into a dog.
Mm-hmm.
So kind of the same idea. Lycanthropy.
Yeah, so that way our audience can go into these films with a lot of hard scientific data about werewolves.
Right.
Yeah.
You seem like you're being facetious, but you're not, are you?
I mean, I kind of am and I kind of am not. Because werewolves aren't real. However, they will have a lot more information than the average moviegoer. Let's just say.
And to be absolutely clear, none of these sightings were werewolves. Like, that's not going to be the end of this solution. But we are going to talk about why people saw dog-headed, human-sized animals on the roadside. That's what's fascinating. You know, where do these reports come from?
That's interesting to me because a lot of the times you can just say, oh, it was an owl. Like,
Sure.
I feel like a lot of the times with Scape or Swamp, there was probably an owl.
Oh, yeah.
Hanging out.
The red eyes. And then we talked about how sometimes an owl sitting on a tree stump, the bark of the stump will make it look like it has scaly skin. So, yeah, sure.
Sure, absolutely. Right. But this seems to be quite different from an owl.
This is very different. I mean, I don't think that anyone who has investigated the Beast of Bray Road or any of the Michigan Dogman sightings have said it's an owl. Mm-hmm. That is not what people go to.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
All right.
So, EJ, start thinking about what your theory is, and we can see how accurate you are, how correct you are.
All right. We'll help. I look forward to hearing about footprints.
Okay.
And any fur left behind and scratches, what those scratches really did look like. I'm looking forward to hearing more details on anything like that.
Well, in the next episode, we are going to get deep into Linda Godfrey's investigation of these reports and get people all over the region are going to start reporting in about werewolves.
Cool.
So get ready. All right. Well, that is our first episode. What do you got? What advice can we give people on the heels of all of this? Take a lantern into the outhouse so you can close the door. That's my advice.
That's really good advice. I would say I'm not a meat eater, but I do sympathize with the idea of throwing a perfectly good piece of food on the ground. So I would say if you're going to throw your bologna, make sure that it lands on a food-safe surface so that everybody can then enjoy it.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, so you're saying maybe if you're going to carry the bologna to distract the werewolf, also have a plate so the werewolf doesn't have to eat it off the ground. Because a werewolf, it's kind of a civilized cryptid, right?
Right, exactly.
Yeah. So maybe carry your bologna with a paper plate. You can just lay it down for the werewolf. It'll eat that, allow you to get away.
Yeah.
Right?
And say Happy New Year.
Yeah. Man, maybe that's why Lebanon drops the bologna, to distract the werewolves.
Are there werewolves in Lebanon?
Probably.
Yeah.
It's actually not. I will say it's actually not. And after the bologna is dropped, and it is in a casing, after the bologna is dropped, it gets cut up and it gets delivered to homeless shelters in the area.
Really?
So they do something really nice with it. Yeah.
That is so sweet.
See, it has a happy story. It has a happy ending.
It does have a bit of a happy ending. There you go.
There you go. We're going to leave you with that because I want to leave you with a happy ending to get us into this new year, 2025. You know what? We're going to get through it together.
We sure as hell are.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you all so much for listening, and we will catch you next time.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Be safe out there. Thanks for listening to Slaying Monsters, the Paranormal History Podcast. If you like the podcast, there's a couple ways to show your support. You can tell your friends, you can leave us a rating and review on your podcast platform, or you can head over to slayingmonsterspodcast.com and click on the Support Us button to leave a donation. For questions, suggestions, and other feedback, reach out to us, slayingmonsterspodcast@gmail.com, and stay up to date by following us on Instagram @slayingmonsterspodcast. Your support helps us grow, and we are truly grateful to have our listeners and community.